Hello everyone, and welcome to the August 2023 supporter-sponsored Q&A with me, Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legmat. If you don't know, we do this once a month, wherein my supporters, like my YouTube members and my patrons, have the opportunity to ask me questions, various different things, as long as they are, appropriate, shall we say, and I will answer them here on camera for all of you to hear and see and learn a little bit about me. It's a fun way to engage with the community. It's a nice little thank you to the people who help monetarily directly support me, which is always very much appreciated. And they're just always fun. They're little videos, but they're enjoyable videos for me. So I hope you enjoy them as well. And if you want to be able to ask questions for these monthly Q&As, consider joining as a YouTube member or as a patron. Links to those are in the description, and you too will be allowed to answer questions or ask questions. Yeah, that part. That would be interesting. That'd be a fun April Fool's thing, actually. Like, I ask the questions and y'all have to answer. That'd be a fun reversal. But anyway, we have a number of questions to get through here today. We're going to try and hit them pretty quick. We're going to start off with the man formerly known as the Incompletionist, who recently went through a brand change and is now known as the Game Reaper. He asks, if you could collaborate with any famous YouTuber, streamer, or otherwise, who would you choose? What project would you do? And what would you hope to get out of it? And that is an interesting one. We've talked a couple times in the past, I think, about team ups, collabs, people I'd like to meet, work with, whatever, in the content creation space. And I mean, there's a lot of really good options out there, but I think in terms of channel identity, obviously, turn-based strategy RPGs are the thing that I am the most well-known for in the YouTube space. A little bit of traction with things like Metroidvanias, or now with Armored Core, Souls-like, stuff like that, but largely strategy RPGs. And as such, I feel like the biggest name YouTuber that I know that regularly plays those games, and I've talked about him before on the channel, is absolutely Christopher Odd. Christopher Odd is definitely a YouTuber who I have taken a lot of inspiration from in terms of how I do my content, the type of content that I want to make, kind of showing that there are people who make the type of content that I like to consume and that I can also make that kind of content, all that type of stuff. And of course, the probably most notable thing that people know about him is his varied XCOM and XCOM 2 playthroughs. And I think it would be a ton of fun to be able to do a sort of project with him where we maybe swapped favorite games, right? Now, I've played plenty of XCOM 2, don't get me wrong, but I'm nowhere on Odd's level. And I feel like it could be so cool to kind of play XCOM 2 with him mentoring and teaching me about the game and helping me to get better at it and explain things that I don't know. And then in reverse, teach him and show him either Final Fantasy Tactics or one of the various Fire Emblem games. And I imagine he'd be able to succeed strategically, but showing him more about the series and what he would probably enjoy or maybe miss going into it, I think that'd be a ton of fun. I really do. Like, that would be so interesting. And they're both games that are within our wheelhouses for the most part. Notably, I do know that Christopher Odd played a little bit of Three Houses, but like many people who played Three Houses as their first Fire Emblem game, got turned off by the sort of like social interaction monastery life aspect of the game, which is a shame since that's obviously not the core of what Fire Emblem is. But I'd like to have the chance to show him a different game in the series that would probably resonate more with his interest in games. So I think that'd be a ton of fun. I would love to be able to learn from someone who has a much, much bigger channel than myself, how to YouTube, how to do content in a way that is successful, and to also just learn about strategy gaming and a game that I very much enjoy from someone who is an absolute master of it. So I think that'd be a total blast. Christopher Odd, hit me up if you ever want to do a weird collab with a tiny little YouTuber like myself. Thank you for the question, Game Reaper. Very much appreciated. Moving on to Star Phoenix. This is probably the most businessy question that we have, but it's a good question to ask, and I appreciate him asking it. Says, when are normal schedules returning, and is there an ETA on when you're going to tackle some of the game suggestions made on Discord? So for those of you who don't know, my schedule's been very out of whack recently. I've been doing a lot of daytime streams when I typically would do far more evening streams because I've been playing Final Fantasy 16 and I didn't want to spoil Jane by playing it in the evening when she was around and trying to talk with you guys about plot elements and things that are happening and all that type of stuff. So I chose to instead stream it during the day when she was at work so that we didn't have to worry about that, right? And now, while we're done with Final Fantasy 16, I've kind of been in the habit of still doing daytime streams because it's what I'd been doing. But I do want to get back to doing more evening streams. That's something I've talked about with Jane. She's totally on board with me doing that and everything, switching back. As long as I'm not playing things that she doesn't want to be spoiled on, which is fairly easy to do. So, when exactly are they returning? As soon as possible? Really? And funny enough, we're going to be talking about part of why that is in just a second, but we'll hit the second half of the question first. Is there an ETA on when you're going to tackle some of the game suggestions made on Discord? If you didn't know, I have a Discord server, link is in the description, and I have a channel in there where the community can recommend games that they think I would like that I can potentially draw from if I need new material, new games to play, and I don't really know what to try, right? I've tried some things from in there, not as many as I'm sure people would like, but there are a ton of games in that suggestion, and there's been plenty of stuff that I've also wanted to cover or should cover because they're strategy RPGs. So it hasn't been as much time, right? This year especially, the last few months especially, have been insane for that because of like Final Fantasy 16, Armored Core 6, Baldur's Gate 3, a ton of different stuff that I either felt the need to cover because like Final Fantasy 7 is something I did on the channel. I wanted to do Final Fantasy 16. JRPGs are part of the identity of the channel, even if it's a smaller part of the identity. Or things that I just absolutely wanted to cover for my own sake, like Armored Core, right? So, now that those games are being completed, interest in them is dying off a little bit, all that type of stuff, ostensibly, time should have been opening up to go back and do some stuff that we had been working on, like Tactics Ogre, finishing Cult of the Lamb, hit up games that people had been requesting very heavily that I play, Iconoclasts, Frog Fractions, stuff like that. And I fully intended to. We're working on New Game Plus in Armored Core 6, then we have to do New Game Plus Plus, we'll probably do some PvP streams, whatever. Then the schedule would open back up a little bit. And then, Black March Studios, developers of Crimson Tactics, The Rise of the White Banner, announced today that they were suddenly, surprisingly, releasing the game into its full release date tomorrow, September the 5th, completely catching me off guard. This is a game that I just played like 3 weeks ago in early access. They gave me a key to play it. We streamed it. It was fun. I said when the game comes out, we're going to do a full campaign, have viewers submit characters, all that type of stuff, just like with Tactics Ogre, because it's a phenomenal game. I really enjoyed it, what we played of it. But I didn't think that it would drop out of early access quite so soon and unexpectedly. So as if he had been gifted by the gods themselves with the talent of prophecy, Star just predicted, oh, well, you know, you should be able to get back to some of this stuff so long as a new strategy RPG doesn't drop on us out of the blue. You had to say something. You had to go and say something. So as far as the ETA on when I'm going to tackle some of the game suggestions made in the Discord, I was going to say, like, now, or at least soon, but now maybe a little less soon. I don't know, man. Hopefully Crimson Tactics won't take that long to get through. Hopefully doing that alongside Armored Core 6 won't take too long, and then we can do it. I don't think there's any major game releases for the rest of the year in terms of, like, big name stuff coming out that I really want to cover. So the latter half, like the fall, winter portion of the year, there should be plenty of room to start doing some of that stuff again. I just can't give an exact timeline because I don't know exactly how long it's going to take to get through Crimson Tactics and Armored Core 6. Sorry. They dropped it on me just like they're dropping it on you, okay? Yeah, so normal streams returning very, very soon. Evening streams returning very, very soon. ETA on other games that people have been recommending and suggesting and requesting a little bit further out, but it is happening. I swear it is. I promise. This year has just been insane. Thank you for the question, Star. I appreciate it. Moving on to Caffeine System, she asks, if you got the choice, would you rather be given a really nice apartment/condo in a major city of your choosing, a house on some kind of land in the mountains, or a house next to a beach? This is an easy one for me. There's benefits to all of them. But I am a country mountain living boy. I would have to go with a house on some land in the mountains. I actually have family that lives out in Montana, and while I haven't been out there myself, my father has, and I've seen obviously pictures and things like that. They've talked about living out there, and it just looks beautiful. It looks so peaceful and serene and just clean and quiet. And oh God, that is my dream. You know, somewhere where there's enough civilization that like I can go to the store, get things to make food, whatever, cook. Somewhere where there's solid internet so I can do my work, somewhere where Jane can do her work, all that type of stuff, yes. But having just a nice place in the mountains with just clean air and the silence except for the sounds of nature, places to go hiking, I would adore that. I would absolutely love that. A place on the beach would also be like really cool, but I'm not as much of a hot weather kind of guy, and beaches obviously tend to imply hot weather. If we're talking somewhere in Maine, that would be more up my alley. And then I'm not really a city kind of guy. So, you know, yeah, definitely house in the mountains. That would be the dream. Like, God, I can only hope one day. So there you go, Caffeine. Very much enjoy having this question. I know you're like, oh, it's kind of a basic question, but I love it. I love being able to talk about stuff like that. And I knew the second I saw it, house in the mountains had to be. Like, if any of you are familiar with Gundam, the 08th MS team, the ending of that, I won't really spoil it in case you're someone who's planning on watching it, but there's just, the ending involves a cabin in a mountain in the woods, and it just looks so nice. It just looks so nice and peaceful. So, yeah, that's my answer. Thank you, Caffeine. Moving on to Tenchi says, Dear Tom, will you play Tears of the Kingdom on the channel? And funny enough, Tenchi, we actually did just a little bit. I did, what was it, 1 or 2 streams, I think, guys, of Tears of the Kingdom on the channel, and it was fun. I enjoyed it. But of all the big releases that have come out this year, especially in the last like 4 or 5-ish months, Tears of the Kingdom is the one that has grabbed me the least. And there's a reason that I kind of left it off that list of like big releases that I felt I had to cover on the channel or wanted to cover on the channel. I've enjoyed what I've played of it, and I've enjoyed what I've seen like Jane play of it because she's been playing it. But in terms of all the things to do on the channel, it's definitely the least interesting to me. So it's been very low priority. Is it something that we could potentially revisit in the future? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it is a fun gun. It is a fun game to play. And I imagine it'd be a ton of fun to play with chat. I really did enjoy that first stream or two that we did. It was so magical. It's just low priority right now. So I'm not opposed. Just have to find the time. And like we were just talking about with Star's question, there's a lot of other stuff that has to get covered as well. And I kind of want to hit up some of that stuff that we've been talking about for a long time before we go back to Tears of the Kingdom. So it could happen. Probably not for a while, though, unfortunately. But thank you for the question, Tenchi. Moving on to Canadia asks, what's an optional or missable, that's where the bull came from, piece of content in a game that you wish was part of the mainline content instead? That's a tough one, man. That's a tough one. Because the way I play games, if it's a game that I'm really invested in, I do everything. I do all the side content. So it's actually kind of hard for me to remember stuff that isn't main story content that I feel like should be. That said, there's 2 entries that come to mind. The first is actually in Fire Emblem 7, Hector Hard Mode, or just Hector Mode in general. If you were not aware, in Fire Emblem 7, you start off playing as Lyn, and you play through her story. It's kind of a prologue to the opening story. It's like 10 chapters. Then you start playing Eliwood's story. Once you complete Eliwood's story, you unlock Hector's story, which is a generally more difficult mode where you see the third Lord Hector, events from his perspective, and get a bunch of different story chapters and like learn more about the story as a whole, get more context for the game world. And then you can play Hector Hard Mode, which is the hardest mode in the game and is probably one of the most famously difficult modes in a Fire Emblem game to date. We have some crazy stuff now with like Lunatic and Maddening and Lunatic Conquest and Fates and all that type of stuff. But traditionally, FE7, Hector Hard Mode, very difficult, a very good challenge. But because it's something that you can only do once you've already beaten the game once, I feel like a lot of people didn't do it or don't do it or don't even realize that they can do it, even though the game tells you. And that's a shame because Hector's one of the best characters in that game. He's one of my favorite Fire Emblem characters, period. And it's really cool seeing events through his eyes and seeing how things play out slightly differently if Hector is your viewpoint character as opposed to Eliwood. So that's definitely one. The other is just all of the late game side content, side quests, as well as like the rumors and things like that in Final Fantasy Tactics. I don't want to get into too much detail with this because Jane's playing the game currently. She's on Chapter 4, has to get to a lot of that side content. But there's just a bunch of really cool side quests and really interesting characters, both mechanically and from their story standpoints, that are completely missable in FFT. And I think that's fine. I think it's good to have side content like that. But finding those characters and interacting with them and learning about their stories helps to flesh out the world of Ivalice in FFT in a way that you don't really get the opportunity to see otherwise, because the story is so laser focused on what's going on with Ramza and Delita and the church and all these different major actors. And it's just all about the focused politics of Ivalice. But there's so many other lands, there's so many other influential people and stories going on. And we know that because of that side content. And we also know it partially because of like the rumors and things like that. So having that extra information that lends so much richness to the game world is hugely valuable. And I think even though FFT is such a good experience, even if you just play through the story and like learn the characters and love the strategy and all that, there's so much more to it if you take the time to do that side content, or even know how to do that side content, because some of it's pretty hidden, and read the rumors and read the grimoire entries and all that type of stuff. So I think those are probably my two answers that jump to mind immediately, most pressingly. So thank you for the question, Canadian. Light B says, building off of Canadian's question a bit, what is a piece of optional / side content you love to see in a given game where the genre of game allows? So immediately what jumps to mind here is something like, say, the Golden Saucer in Final Fantasy VII, not Fire Emblem 7. We were just talking about that. Or say like Triple Triad in Final Fantasy VIII, right? Something that is completely unneeded for the overall sake of the plot and the characters, but it's so cool and so fun, right? I love that type of stuff. Another thing is something like, say, a really strong in-game codex. I'm talking like the Warren Report in Tactics Ogre. I'm talking all of the insanely in-depth lore cards in Final Fantasy 16, stuff like that. I love that. It's not content in terms of like necessarily gameplay, but like we were just talking about with the rumors and the grimoire in Final Fantasy Tactics, you're able to get so much richness and lore and understanding of the game and its world and its characters through optional side content like that. And some games just choose not to include it, and that's a shame. The first time I ever really remember being old enough to appreciate that type of content and taking the time to read it myself was the codexes in Mass Effect. I still think that the codexes are one of the just strongest aspects of those games, because the world of Mass Effect is so rich and interesting and dense with its stories and its lore and all these different alien races and their history and how they interact with one another and how all of that kind of led to the stories that we're experiencing as Shepard. It's so good. And there are so many games that have that level of world building but don't have a system to access it like that. And that, I think, is a shame. I would love to see something like that. I mean, this might be blasphemy a little bit because the whole idea is to kind of piece it together for yourself. But if there was maybe a way in future FromSoft games, future Armored Core games or Souls games or whatever, where you kind of have like a character, much like Tomes in FF16, that is a compendium character that compiles all of like the different item entries, all the different little lore entries from bosses and weapons and items and all that type of stuff that you can find, and puts them all together, right? Someone who's compiling like the lore of the world. You know, I don't want to put people like My Name is Bife or Vati Video or whatever out of business, but like having something like that in a game so that the lay player, someone who may not otherwise take the time to go and read about it outside of the game, can experience it in-game and help them understand that game's world better. I love that type of stuff. So I think I'd have to go with in-game lore and codex compendiums, perhaps unsurprisingly, because I'm me. Thank you for the question, Light. And finally, we have our wildcard question from Rawl. This one, usually I have a pretty easy time coming up with a good wildcard question to answer, but this time I'm struggling a little bit. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Jane. Oh. Jane, who is behind the camera working on some cosplay-related stuff at the moment that I won't reveal. I'll leave that up to her to talk about when she feels like it. What is a good wildcard question that we could answer? Either that you could answer about yourself or that you think I should answer. Because I'm drawing a blank right now. So, took a minute of pondering there, both on Jane's part to come up with a question and me to have an answer to the question. But the question that Jane has asked to me on behalf of Rawl as my wildcard question is, who is my favorite novel protagonist? Which is an interesting one. We've talked about books before on the channel and in these videos, and I've talked at length about like Sabriel and the not the Keys to the Kingdom. That's a different Garth Nix series. The Across the Wall series of books and all that type of stuff. And funnily enough, Jane assumed that the answer to this question would be Sabriel herself, but it's not. I like Sabriel, but my answer does come from the series. And my answer is not Sabriel, but Clariel. Now, this is a character that Jane is not familiar with, as Jane has only read like the first 7/8 of the first book in the series, Sabriel. But Clariel is actually a very, very interesting character, and her book, literally titled Clariel, is actually a prequel to the overall series as a whole. The reason that I like Clariel so much is that she is an example of how, even though things definitely don't just go right for most of the characters in the series, like Sabriel and Lorel and Golden Hand and all that type of stuff, things can go way worse for protagonist characters in the Across the Wall series of books. And Clariel is a character who has to figure out how to deal with that and doesn't always succeed. And her story is actually so integral to the overall story as we see it evolve throughout the rest of the series. Again, this being a prequel to the rest of the series for the most part. It's so interesting to see how her character evolves and how, with just the slightest of incorrect steps, things can go so wrong. Because reading the rest of the series up to that point, you see characters talking about all this different type of stuff. The dangers of necromancy, the dangers of free magic, the dangers of all these different aspects of the Old Kingdom itself, and how it can hurt people, corrupt people, whatever. And then you have a character who's essentially in the same shoes as one of our other similar protagonists, who winds up running headfirst into those things. Not necessarily through any will of her own, but just because that's what circumstances come to play in her life. And it makes for such an interesting read, because it's a story of a character who wants so desperately to do the right thing and will go to the lengths that she needs to do, or that she feels she needs to make happen what needs to happen, but doesn't just have it work out because plot. I won't say much more about it because I don't want to spoil it for Jane or for other people who may be inspired to partake of the series, due to me just never stopping talking about it. But it's an excellent read, and I think it's definitely one of my favorite examples of a protagonist character and a viewpoint character who doesn't always get it right. And a lot of times that's something that I've only ever really seen in things like manga, right? And how characters can kind of really, really come up against the wall of the consequences. Not in like, oh, the hero's downfall, but then they rise again. But like, no, they got to deal with the consequences of what they decided to do. And that's always more interesting to me. So thank you, Jane, for the question. And thank you, Raul, for the question, as always. Yeah, you'll have to hopefully read the rest of the series so you can actually find out what it is that I'm talking about here. But with that said, that is all of our questions for today. Thank you all for submitting your questions, as always. Once again, if you would like to submit a question for next month's Q&A, you can join as a YouTube member or on Patreon, and then you'll be able to ask one question a month and learn some more about me. I invite you to do so. It helps me out immensely. And again, these videos are more fun the more people we have chiming in about stuff. That said, I'm going to wrap this one up here. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you all so much for watching. I do very much appreciate it. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.